Beechwood Hall, old plantation home. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about who used to own this property. Very famous country music singer owned this property and also got injured here, right here on this little busy highway. But we're going to talk about this house. We're going to talk about this property. Who owned this house and this property? But also, what happened here and who else later owned it back in the 1990s and the 2000s. And that, they just recently sold it. We're going to talk about who owned that as well. So, very historic home. So let's talk about it. Here we go. So here's a history plaque about the Mayberry Bailey Plantation home. It says Henry George Washington Mayberry, 1823 to 1897, carved a 1,600-acre farm out of the original 5,000-acre land grant of Colonel Hardy Murphy in 1848. The fertile land along Murphy's Fork provided for a rich antebellum agrarian lifestyle, complete with cotton gin, grist mill, and slave quarters. Beechwood Hall, built in 1856 by master builders Byron and Jasper Lilly, is a two-story brick and stucco residence with Greek Revival and Italian influences, famous for the freestanding spiral walnut staircase and the 40 by 60 central hall. In time, son-in-law Robert Bailey took over the farm, and it remained in the family until it was sold in 1949. In 1951, country music legend Hank Williams Sr. bought Beechwood Hall and 507 acres, but after personal setbacks, he sold his country dream estate at a loss to Truman Ward the following year. So I'm probably going to do a voiceover on this video because there's quite a bit of traffic that's going by and it's very loud. So just going to take some video and I'll do a voiceover and talk about this property. Alright, so a little bit more about Beechwood Hall. So as the sign said, construction started on it in 1856. And it was completed in 1860. It is a little over 6,800 square feet, and it went on the National Register of Historic Places in 1988. And it is one of 3 plantations in Williamson County that predates the Civil War, and one of the few structures that survived the Civil War and the Battle of Franklin. So Mr. H.G.W. Mayberry's son-in-law, Robert Bailey, kept up and preserved the house until 1949 when he sold the property to a man named E. Brown. In September of 1951, Hank Williams Sr. bought the property. At the time when Hank bought the property, it was 507 acres, and he only paid $60,000 for the property. But he never lived there, and he never resided in Beechwood Hall. However, at the time that he purchased the property and the Plantation home. It was in need of repairs and run down, and he did have plans to refurbish it, but he never did. And Hank, later on in 1951, would rent the farm, and that's what he would actually call this property. He called it the farm. He rented it out to a man named F.H. Huff, and Mr. Huff was responsible for the property's upkeep and maintenance, while Hank used the property as more of a retreat to go hunting, fishing, and to keep his horses on. And later that same year, Hank would be at the farm riding horses, and according to his band member Jerry Rivers, he was jumping a ditch on a horseback and he fell off and injured his back, talking about Hank Sr., which required surgery in late that year in December of 1951. And according to many country music historians, this is where the downward spiral for Hank Williams began, after he began requiring more pain medication and alcohol to alleviate his chronic back pain. And by January of the next year, 1952, Williams had moved out of the home that he shared with his wife, Audrey Williams, and he would later divorce her, and Audrey would get the home that they lived in Nashville, and Hank would get the farm, including Beechwood Hall. But since Hank was still renting the property to someone, and Beechwood Hall was basically unlivable, he went and moved in with Ray Price in Nashville, Tennessee. And in October of the same year, Hank Williams would sell the farm, including Beechwood Hall, to J. Truman Ward and Mary Maurice Ward for $28,500, less than half of the $60,000 he had paid for the property. And he owned the property for 13 months, and when he sold it, it still consisted of the 507 acres. In 2002, the power couple Tim McGraw and Faith Hill bought the property and sold it just a few years ago. And they actually lived on a different home on the property, and I will talk about that in the next video. And today, Beechwood Hall sits on 268 acres. It was purchased by the current owner in 2021, who had talked about demolishing the plantation style home, but many people have come forward stating that they do not want it to be demolished. They would like for it to be refurbished, including many celebrities. However, currently as it sits, it is in dire need of many repairs, and the future for Beechwood Hall is still up in the air. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, subscribe, and share. And until next time, thank you and good night.